So we begin this news hour with the U.S. president's call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza during a phone call with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Biden told his Israeli counterpart that a ceasefire is essential and urged him to reach a deal without delay. He also said that U.S. policy depends on immediate action by Israel to protect civilians. This is the first time the two leaders have spoken since Israeli airstrikes killed 7 World Central Kitchen aid workers in Gaza on Monday. Al Jazeera's White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett joins us now. Kimberly, we're going to first run through the language here, what Biden is reported to have told Netanyahu, and after that, you'll tell us how new it is and put some context around it. First, what did he say exactly?
Yeah, a very strongly worded readout, much stronger than we typically see from the White House. It was very clear, and by that word specifically, the president made clear, was used at least 3 times. We knew this was going to be a tense phone call, and it's clear that the president, as promised, dressed down Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The president emphasized that the strikes on humanitarian workers and the overall humanitarian situation was unacceptable. He made clear the need for Israel to announce a series of specific, concrete and measurable steps to address civilian harm, humanitarian suffering, and the safety of aid workers. He made clear the need for Israel to announce a series of specific and concrete and measurable steps to address civilian harm. And he made clear that the U.S. policy with respect to Gaza will be determined by the assessment of Israel's immediate action on these steps. In other words, despite all the steps that Israel has taken to allow aid into Gaza, what the United States feels is that the results on the ground are unacceptable. In other words, the feeling is by the United States that 100% of the population is in need of assistance, and the feeling of the United States is that even as aid workers are trying to help and get that assistance in, their lives are in peril.
Kimberly, this all just crossed, so we're just learning this. At very first look, it looks to me like this is, by quite a significant margin, the strongest language Biden has used against Netanyahu in 6 months. Is that fair?
It's the strongest language we've seen publicly. That is fair. We've never had a window into some of these private conversations. We know that there has been a lot of frustration on the part of the U.S. president, and we have heard leaks that the president has had some very frank discussions, if you will. We knew this was going to be a colorful conversation, and while we didn't get any of that color in the readout, this is one of the strongest, most strongly worded readout that we have ever seen from the White House in terms of how this has been communicated in the message to the Israeli Prime Minister.
Okay, that's an interesting distinction, because you're telling us there's been strong language in private, but this time they are deliberately making it public. Kimberly Halkett reporting from the White House. Thank you very much. We will talk to you again. Let's go to Hamdah Salhut in occupied East Jerusalem. Hamdah, what are you hearing on the Israeli side about this call?
Well, we do know that U.S. President Joe Biden is expressing that it's unacceptable to the United States, and it comes on the heels of a lot of pressure that the Americans and the rest of the international community has been putting on the Israelis when it comes to the number of civilians that have been killed inside of Gaza, the strikes on the aid workers that a lot of the world have simply said is unacceptable, and additionally that the amount of humanitarian aid going in is simply not enough. But the Israeli Prime Minister, speaking at a security cabinet meeting, did say that Israel is, quote, going to defend itself against Iran in the readout with the White House memo with the call with the U.S. president. It did end by saying that Joe Biden did express that the Americans would support the Israelis with that. But when it comes to these strikes on the workers, we are hearing from the Israelis that there is going to be an investigation into the matter. They were not so quick, really, to say that it was them who attacked and targeted these 7 aid workers. Initially, we heard from the army in the morning, who called it an incident. And then we heard hours later from the Israeli prime minister, who said it was unintentional. The army says that their investigation will be wrapping up soon, but it's not really known what that timeline looks like. But they did say the findings would be public.
Hamdah, the U.S. has criticized Israel, and more specifically the Israeli Prime Minister, Mr. Netanyahu, in the past, right? But this criticism is a lot stronger, at least the criticism that they're making public is a lot stronger this time around. How has Netanyahu responded to Biden's criticism in the past?
Look, there's been a lot of back and forth between American and Israeli officials, specifically the president and the Israeli prime minister. There's been a lot of back and forth, not just about this issue particularly, but also about Israel's ground invasion into Rafah. There has been a lot of disagreements with how Israel has been conducting itself throughout this war. And remember, there was supposed to be some sort of Israeli delegation that was heading to Washington in the last week to go brief American counterparts, but that didn't happen. So the Americans are growing increasingly frustrated with Israeli policy, and that hasn't necessarily been a secret. In fact, according to reports within Israeli media, there was a teleconference video type of meeting with American and Israeli officials to kind of brief them on the Rafah operation, and reports indicated that it did not go well, and there was a lot of anger from both parties. So the Americans have been frustrated with how Israel has been carrying itself, how it's been prosecuting this war specifically in Gaza, but the policies of the Americans, as we've seen, have not yet changed. And Netanyahu himself has said that he's going to do whatever he sees fit until there's an absolute victory over Hamas, with or without American support.
Okay, that's really interesting. Thanks for that reminder there. Hamdah Salhut reporting from occupied East Jerusalem.